Hey everyone, it's Bob Crossan, Senior Managing Editor for Water and Waste Digest, and today I have with me Greg Baird. He is the National Lead Service Line Inventory and Replacement Executive Director for BlueConduit. And we're going to be talking all about the lead and copper rule, lead inventory and replacement today, and maybe get some actionable insights for you. So, Greg, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to hop on this call with me.
Hey, Bob, thank you for being with me. And it's obviously a topic very close and dear to me. So I'm happy to talk anytime.
And talk about a very important one over the next 4 to 5 years for every utility in the United States. Could you talk to me a little bit about what the current status of lead and copper rule revision is right now? Where are we with the lead line replacement? What types of things are utilities actually required to do at this moment?
Right. No, and that's a great piece because there's still a lot of confusion around it. I mean, ever since Flint, Michigan occurred, kind of the poster child that woke up 54,000 water utilities on the risk of lead poisoning, it has really, starting from 2021, presidential edict that said, hey, we're going to be hearing some more lead and copper rules coming forward. And in December 16th, 2021, that's where we were hearing that, okay, we're going to have all potable water systems, public water systems are going to really be forced to do some of these different lead and copper rule revisions, but also these improvements. And the improvement component is really kind of due in October 2024, but that really hits dead center on the lead service line issue.
Mm.
And this is where there's still a lot of confusion around this because so many times utilities had to only focus on from the center of the street with the water main to the curb stop, something that maybe they owned, the city and the utility, and they've never really had to address the private side service line. But everything that we're hearing from the EPA is it's a full replacement, it's a full inventory, and they want all 54,000 utilities by October 24th, 2024 to be in full compliance of having an inventory of everything that they have. So it's just not what's lead, but what's galvanized, what's unknown. And the scary part that's going on is basically it's just not for the utility and the city information, but they're going to have to make some of this information public facing maps where their public can actually look up their address to figure out, okay, am I at risk? Do I fall into that category? And if so, when is maybe my lead service line scheduled to be replaced? So there's a lot of new information, things that utilities have never had to deal with before. And right now, the EPA is back trying to, write some guidelines. So all the states and all the utilities are kind of in this limbo, confused state, but they're getting very worried. Some can think I have a couple of years for compliance, but when you actually start trying to figure out some of the different steps, they're almost behind the mark now to
Mhm.
to figure out what your strategy is.
Yeah, I will say for most of last year, the messaging that I heard and the messaging that we were conveying to a lot of folks was start your inventory now. Like there's no like you may not be compelled to do it right now, but if you start it now, at least you're ahead of the curve on that portion of the thing. There's a lot of things in the lead and copper rule, and being on top of at least one bulb can really set you ahead and make your life way easier in the months to come.
Exactly. And that gets into, do we have 8 million that are out there or 10 million that the White House abused, or is it over 12 million? What we do know is every number we have had so far, it's kind of a guess. And
Hmm.
even some states who have already said, this month we want to be able to get a preliminary inventory from the utilities. Utilities don't know. They're kind of guessing. So they can almost pick a number, and it's not going to be right on target. It's going to be higher or lower. But I can tell you some of the historical guesses, estimates that I've seen, everybody was kind of maybe choosing a lower number.
Mm,
So I kind of feel like we're going to end up with a higher number by the time everybody, really looks at what's
yeah.
going on.
So what are you, speaking about this issue of the inventory and the replacement, what do you see as kind of the primary barriers in getting some of this work done in terms of each of those different items?
Yeah, no, that's I think barriers is the right word because we really have a lack of reliable data. We have no data on the private side. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a water company, and they had spent 6,000 hours trying to look at their tab cards, over the last 50 years to try to say, okay, do we know what type of material that's in there? But then, just trying to digitize it and analyze it in a way, it's a huge barrier
Hmm.
just on their technology side because now there's a lack of capacity. So you have unreliable data, missing data, a lack of water utilities. They don't hire data scientists to try to crunch everything and come up with really good models. The other thing that isn't really being discussed a lot, but I've been a chief financial officer for a water utility before, and all of this in my mind comes to the issue of trust. So I really see that this confusion's not helping out, but there's a level of trust that I do think is a huge barrier because you're going to have to start dealing with people on their property line side to be able to get all of the lead out, and that takes a degree of trust. And if the only level of interaction that they've had is news media on Flint, Michigan, and the monthly utility bill, if that's the only lines of communication that's open, that's not necessarily creating a warm fuzzy to be able to work on both sides of the ownership issue. So trust, I believe, is a huge barrier.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the trust thing because when you were talking through your first answer, it also reminded me that there's this element where, yeah, you talked about like this forward-facing stuff with the maps and showing people when certain service lines. That's going to open up all of these doors for people to be like, well, why am I not first in line? And there's a lot of conversations that need to be had on that, and there needs to be a lot of communication here. Like this,
Yes,
I
yeah.
think
I mean,
communication is one of the biggest barriers as well.
exactly. So when someone says, "Okay, I need to start doing the inventory," and I know at some point that's going to lead to a replacement plan, if you're not figuring out that transparency issue,
Hmm.
basically says you better start with a good communication plan as you're going all along because there are no points for being last in line at really communicating. You need to tackle it right up front.
Hmm.
So that's the only way to start initially building that trust.
Yeah. And be really honest and earnest about the resources you have available to you.
Yes,
So,
yeah, and funding, because it's kind of like it's really the perfect storm. Here you have compliance coming down the line, something that utilities and cities allowed to get put into the ground from 1870 to 1986, and it's been this lost and forgotten asset that it's untouchable. You can't touch it. We don't own it. And with the environmental justice component, it's like, yeah, there is no safe level of lead. Luckily, the cities have been managing corrosion control for a very long time very well. So we haven't had, serious lead poisoning. However, that risk is there.
mhm.
Every time you replace a water line, every time there's a water main break, every time you touch the meter, any time you did a partial replacement, you've potentially put people at risk. And so now utilities and cities, based on the federal government and the revisions and the improvements, there has to be that transparency. And now they're going to have accountability and start working together on it.
Yeah. And now that we've talked about some of the bleak, let's talk about some of the positives too, because there's technologies out there that are going to help with this, and I know that BlueConduit does have some technologies there, as well as several other folks out there. But could you talk a little bit about like the technologies that you see as being really useful in this case in terms of the inventory and the replacement, and how utilities can leverage the money that they do have, even though being cash strapped, and the resources they have, often being workforce strapped right now too.
Oh yeah.
Could you talk about like how that all kind of works together? What technologies are there, and how can utilities really leverage their budgets right now to try and use those technologies to the most of their ability?
Well, it's a great question. Here I've worked on the water main side and the wastewater side, and the whole thing has been it's an infrastructure funding issue, and the only way we're going to really solve it in a cost-effective way is being able to add innovation and technology. And when we look at what happened in Flint, and they started actually going and doing a lot of digging and not necessarily finding anything. They had some maps, they had GIS, they had some data, but that data really wasn't reliable to actually give them the accuracy that they needed. So they started burning through a budget that they had without necessarily getting to the point where they were replacing the lead service lines. So it's really that our founders within BlueConduit in 2016, they basically said, okay, let's create a statistical model. Let's build into a process where we can basically have a verified lead service line as a way to feed the machine learning model. And that's how we're going to get to the highest accuracy rate.
Hmm.
So BlueConduit, with that tried and true tested, in the field in Flint with everybody watching, was getting, high 80 hit rates, meaning that the predictive model was right 80, 85, 90% of the time over a long period of time. The benefit there is that it was a unique model to that community. They ingested as much data, any sort of data, they digitized it, but they basically audited it in a way so that they could make sure that it was statistically significant to maintain a very high rate. So then they could say, this is where you need to go do inspection digs to then feed the model to then be able to have an accurate inventory that's going to drive that accurate replacement plan. So that's kind of the gold standard now. You have varying degrees off of that as far as the different technologies or different components, but this adds into, we talked about barriers. There's the technical capacity, and then really one statistical model might not be, as good as another. We're seeing and hearing different stories where I have GIS, I'm buying some parcel date data, and now I'm going to go start doing some digging, and that 15 to 25% hit rate. You
Mm.
add some other model, maybe it's even a better model, but it's a global model, and now maybe you're at 40%, maybe you can get to a 50% hit rate accuracy, but we're hearing the inspection digs are costing between $500 and $2,500, $2,000 out in Colorado. So if you are at a 40-50% range, and half the time these are false digs, and you're blowing through your budget, and so the accuracy of your model actually is what is going to save you money through the rest of the process. So I get really fearful sometimes because I've worked for a utility, and I've worked for engineering firms. And if a utility doesn't actually have or utilize a tried and true tested model for their community, they could be spending a whole lot of money not necessarily getting the lead out. And if you think of the downstream costs and implications there, then you're talking about how many test kits are you going to think you're going to need if your model is inaccurate, right? So there's a cost savings there.
Mhm.
How many inspections are you going to do? Uh, and how many is going to actually quantify the right location for your lead, you're going to waste money there. And then the actual replacement plan and the public facing map for someone to look up my address and say, do I have, what's the likelihood of having lead going into my home? If it's not accurate, you've kind of blown reputation there, and you're going to get a bigger demand and create a bigger issue if you're undershooting and if you're overshooting on the number. So how do you be able to verify that? And if your model isn't finding all the lead pipes, what are you missing and leaving in the ground? So the accuracy of the model and the hit rates is the core component. So there's a lot of different data, there's a lot of analysis, there's a lot of different ways to be able to set it up, but you have to be able to verify that, because the cost of effectiveness of this is huge.
Hmm.
And it gives you the ability later to be able to have a more accurate budget, and figure out your funding. So so uh, every model is not the same in this
Yeah.
scenario. It's a little scary, but that by itself is a barrier.
Yeah. One of the things that while you were talking that it reminded me of like if you want to take this to the next level, say that you're already online for this inventory and whatnot, pair that up with your roads department and where they are digging. Suddenly, you
Yeah,
dig
no,
once, two projects. Easy,
yeah,
it is a next level thing though because it takes a lot of forethought and a lot of planning. But if you're able to leverage that, imagine the savings that you could make.
yeah, no. When you talk about in BlueConduit, when we talk about, because I'm kind of from the finance world too, and asset management and technology. When you talk about a cost-effective approach, I mean the White House federal government, $15 billion over 5 years. So 2.9 billion going to the different states, pretty much their state revolving funds. But those are going to be low interest rate competitive loans. A lot of it earmarked for disadvantaged communities. So there's a lot of work that they're going to have to do, but it's only going to take care of maybe 50% of the problem. So the other portion is going to be your rates, your capacity to issue debt to be able to handle this, and that's going to actually start driving the speed at which you're going to reduce lead poisoning risk to your community. Is that a 5 year? Is that a 10 year? New Jersey governor said, "Hey, we're going to take care of all this in 10 years."
Yeah.
Well, that depends on your budget, which kind of depends on the cost. But in the most cost effective model, besides even the number of test kits and digs and everything like that, you have that other strategy of integrated asset management. And I've talked to a number of different engineering firms, and they get this because they're working on the roads and the pipe rehab, the sewer rehab, and the water mains. So if you already know where your high likelihoods are, and it's over a plan, 3, 5, 10 year plan, now in a cost effective way, you're going to be able to know, okay, in 5 years, I'm doing the street pavement. In 8 years, I was going to do the water main replacement. In 6 years, I was going to do the sewer main replacement. Oh, okay, I have the sewer or the service line and inventory list. Now I can all of a sudden rebalance all of those things. So we're only going into a community once, and
Hmm.
we're only digging, and tearing up your street once. And that's going to be a cost savings. But just think of the implications back to what we talked about, building that trust with your community.
Hmm.
So that cost effectiveness component is huge on the integrated assets. But sometimes I think almost more importantly, and cost means everything, but you can track the information to do it in a water equity way. You could take the layers of this planning, and you can still say, okay, let's get the lead out for the households that are low income or have more children in the home or some other criteria. You get to balance all of that in. So you really become a stronger voice on social justice and the environmental justice story that's at play here.
Hmm. Yeah. I was gonna say we're kind of running out of time, and I do want to talk to you about environmental justice, so we might have to do another interview talk specifically about that. It'd be a lot of fun.
Anytime, Bob. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you, Greg. Thank you so much for your insights and everything. It's very interesting, and I hope that all the people who are watching have gotten a little bit out of this. And if you want to learn more about this type of technology, you can check out the link in the description below. We'll have some resources for you from Blue Conduit, as well as some resources of some articles that we've got on our website that will help you out as well. So, once more, thank you so much, Greg. I appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you, Bob.